When we think of careers that offer big opportunities for growth and advancement, retail rarely comes to mind. The ubiquity of retail masks the size and scope of the industry. In the U.S. alone, nearly 16 million people work in the retail sector. In Australia, almost 10% of the workforce have their main job in the retail industry. The retail sector is the UK's largest private sector employer, with 2.9 million employees. The numbers speak for themselves. Still, retail has an unfair stigma about it, one that can deter people from entering the industry and certainly from actively seeking advancement. Too many people see retail as a stepping stone or an interim job, with their eye ultimately on getting into tech, finance, or perhaps one of the creative sectors. I'm Jane Singer, and welcome back to A Seat at the Table. This show is now listened to in 138 countries, so a big shout out to all of our esteemed listeners. In each episode, we sit down with some of the smartest and most innovative people who join us as guests on this show and share a ton of valuable business and life-enhancing insights. Today we are joined by Brian Librach, who spent over 35 years in senior leadership roles for some of the biggest retailers, including Urban Outfitters, Pacific Sunwear, Old Navy, and others. In his new book, The Retail Leader's Roadmap, he's created the ultimate guide to taking control of your career. If you're feeling stuck and you're looking to rewrite your career outcome, this is the book for you. Brian will be discussing an action plan for retail execs who feel stuck so they can start moving forward again. Why even with AI, retail will still be very people-driven. And micro tweaks we can make in our performance to make us better leaders. One of the foundations of a successful retail operation is having the right people in key positions. To achieve this, leading organizations turn to AsiaNet consultants. They have over 3 decades of boots-on-the-ground experience, giving them critical market knowledge and contacts. To learn more about AsiaNet consultants, check out their website at asianetconsultants.com. That's asianetconsultants.com. I'll leave a link for it in the show notes. If you've ever listened to a podcast and thought, I'd love to be a guest on one of these shows, but you have no idea of how to make that happen, well, actually there's a simple 6-step formula to landing those guest spots. Follow this and you'll be able to start being a podcast guest. If you'd like to learn how to do this yourself, simply go to seat.fm/podcast course. I know that's a lot, so I'll repeat it. That's seat.fm/podcast course. And of course, I will leave a link in the show notes of this episode, not only for this, but for all the other links that I have mentioned. And of course, you can find all of the links on our podcast website at seat.fm as well. Meanwhile, let's sit down with Brian and find out how we can turn a retail job into a powerful career. Well, Brian, I'm so happy to have you with us here on A Seat at the Table. You know, retail is such an important industry for many, many of our listeners around the world. And I think that, we talk about it a lot, but I think you're bringing such a new perspective and a very exciting perspective to the table.
Well, thank you, Jane. It's great to be here. I look forward to the conversation.
Yeah, so, I think that when we look at retail, oftentimes people don't see it as the exciting, dynamic career with opportunities, right? That, for example, tech has, or, even investment banking still has, and other careers that, sort of seem like a little more glamorous, sexy, and retail often seems to, be looked at, right, as not something where you're going to go and have an exciting career and really self-development and make good money. You seem to feel otherwise. And, you talk about in your book that, in fact, you refer to your book as a diagnostic tool. Can you explain how that works? You say it's a diagnostic tool for people who feel their careers have stalled.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think retail careers can be sexy. I think retail careers can be something that puts good quality food on the table for you and your families. And so it is what I've, done for 35 years, and, definitely a proponent or positive, person for what retail can be. In terms of the diagnostic piece, I wrote the book. Really, it's 35 years of collected insights. It's based on application, not theory. And it's based on either things that I've done, mistakes that I've made, successes that I've had, or observations that I've been able to make in others as well. And it's meant to be a book that can be read cover to cover, start to finish, but it's also really meant to be a book that you could pick up when you recognize that maybe your health isn't what it needs to be, right? If you think of like a car, or if you think about your health in general, this diagnostic approach where it could just be one small thing that's getting in the way of the vehicle running effectively, or your health being what it needs to be. And so I believe that there are different things that need to happen in a person's retail career, or really leadership in general. I found that what I put in this book that is specific to retail actually translates outside of retail as well, to anything and all things leadership, or anything or all things growth related. And I know that because I've applied it to my real estate license, I've applied it to the business that my wife and I run. But I stuck to the lane of retail because it's what I know, and it's what I can speak to with great confidence.
Yeah, I think that's really important. You talk about retail execs who feel stuck in their careers, and I think a lot of people feel stuck in their careers, not just in retail, but in general. What do you suggest they do to change that, right? Can you share specific action steps?
Yeah, absolutely, Jane. So I think it's not even just executives. I think it could be, anybody. It could be trying to figure out, I talked to a 19-year-old the other day and just wasn't sure what he wanted to do. Freshman in college, just didn't know. So it wasn't even about rewriting his career outcome. It was writing it. Like, what is it that this person needed to kind of set out to do? And what I wrote in the book is I broke it into three different pillars. Build your character is pillar number one, build your connections is pillar number two, and then build your plan is pillar number three. And that first pillar, which is build your character, really is the hard skills. It really is the fundamentals, the foundation that holds the house up throughout the storms that will hit. Build your connections is really the second pillar. And I look at that as kind of like your upperclassmen. If you think of a university, your kind of junior, senior year, you've taken your core classes, and now you're going to take the classes that are going to help you ascend and get you ready for what's next. And then the build your plan is really where you put pen to paper. It's where you learn how to really earn the money that you're being paid, and how you will also be able to learn. I refer to it as kind of you have to pay, you kind of have to earn to learn. You have to deliver on your day job. And so there are techniques that you can deploy that will help you do that. And you also have to create space that where you can learn so that you can keep up and continue to ascend.
Okay. Well, can you give us some examples of how someone might do that, assuming that they've gone through each of those steps, and they're feeling stuck at the moment, right? What would they do? What would you, if you were sitting down with somebody and they had a fairly senior level job, or a little, somewhere between upper middle to not C-suite, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
and they feel like, I'm just not going anywhere. What would you suggest they do? What would you counsel them?
Yeah, well, I think, the first thing is the build your character pillar of the book really is about five different practices. It's about outworking people, it's about outlearning, it's about being the example, it's about being accountable and being disciplined. And although that might sound very junior, at any point in a person's career, they could not be exhibiting something that I just mentioned. They might not be working as hard as they have in the past. They may be a little bit egotistical, take themselves too seriously, and not open to learning, right? They may not be setting the best example for everybody that's around them. They may play a victim and not be accountable, and they may not be disciplined in the way that they go about things. And so it's about recognizing which of those, if not more than which of those, which two or three, are you not exhibiting to the levels that you have in the past. When you've been at your very best, you will have been exhibiting those things. And then to me, those are simple things that a lot of times, especially if you're established, you just need to remind yourself. They're probably not skill sets you need to learn if you're established in your career. They might be when you're early in your career, but a lot of times I refer to that as kind of just knock it off. Like if you're not working hard enough, just knock it off and start working hard again, and you'll get unstuck. If it's not any of those things, I find that they are character, they're connection building. They are about whether or not you can develop people, whether or not you can communicate effectively or influence. And communicate effectively is really a challenging one because a lot of people just want to get stuff off their chest and say whatever it is that's on their mind. But communication is really evaluated on how the receiver receives the information. And so you have to get really strong at communicating and influencing and getting other people to do things that you want them to do, not because you're manipulating them, but because you're influencing them. And so you might find that there's some skill sets that you're struggling in, you're not getting out of people what you want because your communication or influencing skills aren't what they need to be. And so I would lean into that. But that's why the book is really written as a diagnostic. So you can pick up a chapter and say, okay, this is where I'm not exhibiting a behavior that I should be. And I either need to knock it off, start doing it, or I need to get on Google. I need to talk to some mentors. I need to acquire the skill set that is necessary in the current times to be successful in communication development or influencing as well.
I think that's really interesting. Now, what if a person feels that they're doing all these things or they're doing most of these things, and where they are, there just doesn't seem to be room for growth in the particular retail environment they're in? Um, do they need to start looking for another job? I mean, I know that sometimes people feel that I just can't move within the company that I'm in.
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's interesting because the very last chapter of the second pillar, which is influence, I talk about meeting your boss and their boss at least 51% of the way. And it's a chapter that I think a lot of people aren't going to like because it really puts the onus of your career back on yourself. But also, it talks about, or I talk about, how important it is to recognize that if you're not in alignment with those two people, your boss and their boss, you will be stuck. You just will. And that's part of life. That's the reality of the business. They are in control of your ascension, whether you like it or not. Now, you can influence them by meeting them where they are and providing them what they're asking you to provide and do it in a way that is what they're looking for. If you can't, I refer to it as if you can't put your head down comfortably at night because you cannot align to either of those individuals, then that's when it's time to look. And that's when it's time to find other individuals that you can align to, or you're going to remain stuck and most likely not be happy at work, not be happy at home, and be visibly frustrated more often than not. And I would say the majority of people do that. They choose to not want to take on that level of ownership and influencing others because it's the most difficult thing to do because you can't control. And a lot of us in retail are kind of in need of control. And to learn how to influence, I believe, and that's why it's the very last chapter of the Build Your Connections portion of the book. It's the last step before you put pen to paper on your plan, because it is the last step in your development and being able to, whether it be ascend or deliver greater quality results.
I think that's very true. And I think that you're right. It is something that's very difficult to look at yourself and try and see what part of the problem is you, right? And then to obviously be able to take corrective action on it. Um, do you think, from your experience, 35 years in retail, having achieved quite a high level of success, do you encourage people to reach out to senior people, of course, to your immediate boss, but how much higher do you think people need to go in order to discuss maybe some stress points they're feeling, or ambitions that they might have?
Yeah, it's interesting that you asked that question because my wife and I, we run a fitness studio as well, and we teach, teenagers as well. And one of the things we talk about was, role models is really important in achieving goals.
Mm.
And so we talked to the teenagers about this, and it's no different in an adult life. You need to have role models, people that are setting examples, people that you can learn from. And so you need to seek them out. So whether that is your boss or their boss, whether it is somebody else lateral, could be somebody that is beneath you, quote unquote, in the ladder of success, and asking questions of, for example, what is it that I could do better? What is it that I can do differently? But I do believe that whether it's picking up a biography, I used to, I read business books and I read biographies. Those are the only two types of books that I read. And the biographies I read because I want to understand why and how people think, and want to be able to pick apart that and be able to adopt whatever it is that I find to be necessary. So I don't even think it's about going further north than your boss or their boss. It's more about just if there are individuals doing something that you would like to do and do it as well as they do it, seek out and either observe and pay attention or ask some questions.
Okay. I think that's really good advice. I mean, I think that it depends, of course, on the organization and the general, what you might call atmosphere within that organization. But I think that's really interesting advice, to encourage people to reach out to people who are senior to them, to let them know what their goals are and tell them that they want, let your seniors know that you want to advance in the organization, and perhaps what steps you might take to make yourself perhaps a better candidate for a higher position.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I think you also have to filter the feedback. Not all feedback is created equal, not all feedback is accurate. And I think, and I've used this example. I had a boss not that long ago, actually. I mean, I've been in the business 35 years, and I'd say maybe 5 or 6 years ago was the first time I ever had a boss tell me, my feedback is my feedback. It's my own observations. I'm not saying it's correct. I'm saying based on my experiences, here's what my feedback is for you. And now it's up to you to decide how you want to decipher that feedback and what you want to action. And I didn't hear that for 29 years of my career. And so the
Wow.
last 6 years, I've been leveraging that same feedback for others.
That's really interesting. You're right. Very few people would frame their feedback like that. Most people would think their opinion is,
Exactly.
indisputable.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that can be something very heavy for an employee. I mean, I think sometimes the criticism or assessment is justified, and sometimes perhaps it's just a bit one-sided, yet a person, feels demoralized or, maybe worse, right?
Yeah, and it's a fine line to walk because people want people to have high learning agility and
Mm.
leaders, they want to be heard. They want to be listened to, they want to be followed. And so you have the juxtaposition of how do I show folks that I'm very eager to learn, I have high growth mindset, I'm not fixed, like all this stuff that's extremely popular in today's leadership culture. But at the same time, decipher the feedback and decide, which feedback you want to take and which feedback you don't want to take. 35 years ago, I read a book, Seven Habits, by Stephen Covey. And one of the comments or one of the chapters was seek first to understand, then to be understood. And that changed the game for me because I really wanted to state my opinions back when I first started in my career. And so I learned how to be patient and try different things before I gave feedback. And it helped those that were my leaders that wanted me to follow them. It showed them that I was willing to, but that I was also intelligent enough to articulate what I saw working and not working, and then we would have a really good dialogue from there.
Yeah, that's something that it's a skill that takes a lot to develop. I think a certain subset of people, a very small subset of people, are born with that kind of mental toughness, you might say. But I think that for most people, probably could do with myself included, right? In training to be able to look at that, handle it, and just get used to reacting. I mean, sometimes you can do that, and sometimes, it's tough.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree.
Yeah, I think that's we train people in hard skills, right? And we train people sometimes in some of the softer skills, but we rarely train people in, I don't even know what the right word for it is, the kind of skills that we're talking about that that gives them the ability, right, to manage themselves.
And that's what the Retail Leaders Roadmap is entirely intended to do. It's to put your entire career in your own hands. And if you're lucky enough to work for somebody who's invested in you and puts you first, take advantage of it because it won't last very long. It'll be there for a moment in time. And for the 2 or 3 years that you have that luxury, take advantage of it. But for the remainder of your career where you don't, and it's not, I think in some cases it's because bosses don't care. I think in most cases it's because bosses don't have the bandwidth or the
Mm.
skill set. They've gotten where they've gotten for whatever the reason might be. In a lot of cases, it's because they delivered results in the previous role that they had, not because they were worthy of more. You typically in retail ascend based on your ability to deliver results. But if you're going to be a successful leader of other human beings, you have to have the soft skills. You have to put other people first if you're going to be successful as a leader. And I just think that I refer to it as kind of, I think 80% of leaders don't have the time to put other people first or choose not to. And so that means 80% of people that are out there trying to ascend and put better quality food on the table for their families don't have a leader that's putting them first. And that's what this book is meant to do, is to put their careers and their success back in their own hands and give them the tools necessary to be successful.
Wow, I think that's really, that's the kind of book that I think everybody needs to have, right? Everybody has
I
to
hope
have
so.
that like within arm's reach so that, when you need it, you can grab it.
Yeah, and it's and in the business that I've been in for a long time, I do book clubs with my teams, and we'll pick a book and we have not read the book, and we'll read it from kind of cover to cover, and then we'll get together and talk about what we liked or disliked about the book and what we'll take from it. And my hope is that folks that are in retail or in any job that they lead others, that they do similar things, whether it be a book club with folks or it be you recognize somebody else is struggling and maybe you recognize they're not being open to learning and that's the pillar or that's the practice they need to work on, that you pick the book up and you gift it to them and say, look, here's the second chapter that I think you really need to pay attention to, and then leave it to them at that point.
Right.
Like let them read that chapter and decide for themselves if whether or not there's something that they can do differently. But the intention of giving somebody something shows the effort that the person has for somebody else. I'm a huge sports fan, and Phil Jackson, when he was with the Bulls and the Lakers, used to give books to their players, and the players were like, "What are you doing? I don't want to read this book." But every book was very specific to that individual and what they needed to learn. And I hope that folks will do that with this book for their team as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, what do you see as the big opportunities in retail today that you feel people are overlooking? We're going to take a quick break now, and then we'll be right back.
We were hiring when we were making 50 to 100K monthly losses.
And why? Welcome to episode 1.
I can't think of a single founder who's been around for a decent amount of time in business who hasn't had their tunnel of year. This was that year. We're going to be okay, yeah, Sheree. Some are going to hear this and think, you TDP. But hear me out. You only have to do the math to understand that very soon we were $500,000 down.
I think it comes back to people not owning their own path and simply waiting around and hoping that somebody else will help them out. I think that's the biggest thing. And I think if I look at two different sides, if I look at organizations or if I look at individuals, organizations, I believe today, underestimate the productivity that people can deliver. And so they don't invest in people the way that they used to, because on a P&L, it's very difficult to say, if I do this, spend here, it's going to deliver there. And so I believe that engagement with folks to get the productivity that they're capable of is the biggest challenge that organizations have today, and not just in stores. If you have a buyer or a merchant or an allocator or a designer, they need to be fully engaged. They need to be committed to the work. And I believe most folks are rationally committed, not emotionally committed. And so when you're rationally committed, you do it because you have a paycheck, but you don't bring your very best self to work. And so I think companies need to engage their teams more effectively to get the productivity that'll put them in a position to not have to cut and have all the budgetary problems that they run into, because they're getting 100% of what people are capable of and not 70%. And then on the flip side, I think individuals need to stop waiting around for companies to do something for them. And if both sides do the work, that's magic. People will own their own career's ascension, and organizations will better engage their teams, and the two will come together and productivity will skyrocket. And I think there are some companies out there that are doing that, but there are a lot of companies out there that are not.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And I think you're absolutely right. It just, there are some people who simply don't care about the people who work for them. But I think that for a lot of people, they care. But like you say, people are scrambling just to keep up with the work and make their figures that month, or keep the selling floor humming along if people call in sick or whatever. There's always something, right? So,
Yeah, and it's oh, go ahead, Jane. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
no, it's okay. I'm just saying that, sometimes best intentions, right, get away from us.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that I talk a lot about in the book is prioritization, and I think that's missing. And very few companies will say, do this because it's more important than that, because they want you to do everything. But you have to prioritize. You have to prioritize your people, where you spend your time. You have to prioritize your product, where you spend your time at different times of the year. And educating folks on how to do that will help them improve their decision quality and also make sure that what's most important is getting done. And if what's most important is getting done, the company likely is being more profitable.
I like the fact that you made a point of saying that you have to train people on how to prioritize, because I think that we often want people to prioritize, we tell people to prioritize, but a lot of people don't really know how to do that, right? So I like the fact that you brought up that sometimes you have to actually teach people how to do some of the stuff that we just assume everybody knows how to do.
Yeah, I mean, I was coaching somebody during a holiday, and they said to me, I don't understand. Is it me? Is it the company? Is it my team? Because I'm walking into all of my stores as district manager and a fairly new district manager, and they weren't happy. Every single store, they kept walking into things they were not happy with. And so I asked them, I said, well, have you prioritized the work for your team? And he said, well, what do you mean? I said, have you decided what's most important for them to pay attention to during holiday? And so, for example, whether that's denim or whether that's activewear, whatever it might be, make that get to 100%. Like let that be an A performance and make sure that they know that they need to focus on that. But where else can they not focus? Give them the right to not focus on something that the company might be asking them to focus in on so that they can find the time. And immediately it clicked. And immediately they shifted their focus and prioritized on the front of store, prioritized on denim, whatever that case might be. And they started to see success in those areas. And so you have to prioritize, whether it's people or product. And you're going to be ready for next if you don't have to, because you're getting everything done. And that's, at the very tail end of your role before you take on another one, and it just starts all over again.
Yeah, that's really important. And I think that it's the rare manager that actually, puts that forward to the people who work with them and gives them, the direction in how to handle, some of the overwhelm. Now, at a time when people are fear AI, right? AI is sort of seen like, the monster that's going to eat us all alive. How do you see that playing out with regard to retail? Because oftentimes people look to see, well, how do I have jobs that have a lot of headcount. Technology was seen as taking some of those jobs, and now AI is seen as wiping out the ones that technology hasn't taken. What's your take on it? Based on having been in the industry as you have for so long.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was at NRF, about a month ago, back in January, I think it was, and I was talking to a lot of people about AI. It was the topic of the town, and somebody said to me, "Is AI is not going to take the jobs away from people. It's going to take the jobs away from people who don't have a high degree of respect for AI." And it is true. AI is necessary today. I mean, workforces are getting smaller, right? Birth rates are going down. Like it's evolution, where I believe that it's just what's next, and so. One of the things I talk a lot about in the book, and it's the build your character portion of the book, is accountability and acknowledging and embracing it. Two different things. You have to acknowledge it, which is your mind has to get your head wrapped around it. And you have to embrace it, which means your heart has to accept the fact that this is the reality. You need both. And so I think people are starting to acknowledge AI and acknowledge the impact that it's going to have mentally. They're getting their heads wrapped around it, but they're not, their heart isn't in it yet. They don't really understand it. And that's where you can, I use an example, like if it's raining outside, this is going to sound like a really simple example, and you sell umbrellas, like put them in the front of your store,
Right.
right? Like that's like, I don't like rain, but I'm going to take advantage of it. Like taking advantage of your situation is when you can embrace it, when your heart connects to it. AI is here to stay. It's only going to get better. It's only going to get more efficient. I was talking to a company called Ubic. They do an amazing job with their software, and they're using AI to find ways to drill into the business more effectively for people. So as a leader, I don't have to do all the homework to understand where to spend my time. It's going to tell me. So now I can spend all of my time on solving the problem versus figuring out what the problem is. And those are the kind of things that I think AI is going to do for us, is they're going to free up space for us to do the more exciting work, and take away a lot of that minutia that takes so much time in order to determine what to do. So I'm excited for it, and I think people should be as well, but it's generational too. I hate to say it, like the younger generation, the 18, 19-year-olds that are just started out in college, they're going to really embrace it, and they're going to, like generations before with whatever that might have been, they're going to do the best work with it.
Yeah, interesting. And I'm looking forward to seeing how it plays out. There's a lot of conversation around it. I've heard pros and cons and different use cases, and it's still quite new. So it'll really be interesting to see how it impacts every industry, right?
Absolutely.
It's hard to get a handle on it, but certainly, retail still does, to a great extent, rely, at least on the front end, on the human touch. So maybe there'll still be jobs.
Exactly. I do believe that there will be. I believe there'll be plenty of jobs out there for us.
Yeah, I think that's definitely good news. Well, Brian, you've shared so many interesting things. I've learned a tremendous amount talking to you. Where can people get in touch with you? I think a lot of people would probably like to get their hands on your book. How can we connect with you?
Yeah, thank you, Jane. So the book Retail Leaders Roadmap will launch on March 12th. I will be spending time at Shop Talk March 17th through the 20th doing a book signing and another podcast with Rethink Retail. I'm going to be in University of Dallas or University of Texas out in Dallas for another convention towards the end of March. You can look me up on LinkedIn. I do a video pretty much every single morning that hopefully helps people light their fire and get started. You can subscribe to my YouTube, The Retail Well Wisher, Brian Librach, as well, and keep up with the videos there and the posts there. But I would say most importantly, pick up the book, read it cover to cover, give it as a gift to folks, do your team building, book clubs and things of that nature. That's going to be, I think, the best way to get started.
Well, I'm going to put all of those links in the show notes. And I want to thank you so much for joining us here.
Well, thank you, Jane. I'm so excited and I really appreciated the time.
Okay.